first two verses.
Two verses.
So let's see if they seem to make sense. The first, let's concentrate on the very first verse. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Translated somebody? God spoke to Moshe. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe. Anything else? Lemor. What's with that? Wait, what's lemor? Just translate the first verse. Huh? To say. It's an infinitive, to say. What do you mean to say? God spoke to Moshe to say. If I would say Yaakov spoke to Ruth to say, what do I mean to say? What does it mean? To say to someone else. To whom? Right. Who else is going to say it to? So there's things apparently which God says to say, and things which God doesn't say to say. Let's look now at the second verse. Speak to the children of Israel, and they should take a raised offering. What's wrong with that? Speak to the children of Israel. He already said to say. God said this is for quote, this is for public release, this announcement. So why does it have to say then, speak to the children of Israel? Or conversely, it could just be God spoke to Moshe, speak to the children of Israel. Why put the lemor in to say if you're going to tell them, speak to the children of Israel? That's the simple problem. So the Or HaChaim, usually you have by Daber Hashem Moshe lemor, Ish ki yikna, whatever it is, and then comes immediately the statement, not speak to the children of Israel. So the Or HaChaim deals with that problem. And he quotes the Gemara that lemor is to teach you that you have no right to tell someone else what a third party told you unless they specifically authorize it. So lemor means this statement is for public release. Okay?
In fact, we get it often in the Chumash.
Yes, very often. Lemor means it's a statement which God told Moshe he could release. But he doesn't have to. According to the Or HaChaim, it's very interesting. God says this is one you can put in your public files, and you can release it when you decide is the right moment. This would fit very nicely the view of Rabbi Shmuel as opposed to that of Rabbi Akiva in the Gemara, that the Torah was spoken in human language and given bit by bit. Each time when there was decision they could learn some more, they had absorbed what was before, they got some more. So a lemor doesn't necessarily mean perhaps tell it immediately. It means it's for public release. So when God says Daber al bnei Yisrael, he's not leaving it optional that it's merely for public release, but you have to tell it to them, okay? So the key word lemor is affixed to all statements which may be told over, and if God insisted to be told over, perhaps soon, then he adds Daber al bnei Yisrael. That's the Or HaChaim. But he learns also for human beings, when someone tells you something, you should not tell it over to anyone else without permission. Right? Interesting, very
That is
interesting.
also an instruction, isn't it?
Huh?
Compared to Yomer. He could say by Yomer.
Yes, Daber is always an instruction. I translated on my sheet, in order to highlight this, God spoke to Moshe to say over, direct the children of Israel. It's heavy language, commanding language, Daber. Amirah is softer language, gentler. For example, we have Amirah by Beis Yaakov, the women of Israel, that Moshe is told to really tell it to the man, but gently tell it to the women. We have that a number of times, the contrast between Amor and Daber. We have two descriptions here. Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel. That itself is a little funny, because if you just say, speak to the people, the Am, or something like that, we know who they are 1,000 times over, right? It's bnei Yisrael. Again, this is assuming that the Torah has every word and letter count. As I pointed out several weeks ago, that's not necessarily a fair assumption. We're used to doing that in the yeshivas. And Tzvi Ari Yehuda, in his work on the two Meshiltas, which we dealt with last week, pointed out that that's a common error. It's an automatic assumption of the school of Rebbe Akiva which says that the Torah is like a secret code with every little symbol having meaning. But according to the school of Rabbi Yishmael, that the Torah speaks in the language of people with normal human style. So you could say that God just speaks to the children of Israel because that's the way you speak. And you may not necessarily derive something from it. But someone does derive something from it.
But it might be both.
It might be both. Daber al b'nei Israel. Speak, as I say, you might derive something from it, but you mustn't necessarily. Speak to the children of Israel, v'yikhu li, and they should take for me truma, a raised up offering.
Why do you say from him?
For me. Li, for me. To me or for me. V'yikhu li, they should take for me a raised offering. Is there something odd about that phrase? Is that how one speaks? Speak to Martha, and she should take me a cake. I wouldn't say take me, what would I say? Bring me or give me. All right? Give me a raised offering. Give me a nadava. Yeah, we got to print the parsha sheets. Give a nadava. I wouldn't say take a nadava. I would say give. So why does it say they should take for me, for God, a raised offering, a truma? Then he already said, who is taking the raised offering? Who is it? B'nai Yisrael. Daber b'nai Yisrael. V'yikhu li truma. Ve'et kol ish asher yivenu libo. From every man whose heart motivates him, just say, me'et asher yivenu libo. Why put in the words kol ish, every man? Kol ish asher yivenu libo. Tikhu, you should take, that makes sense, Moshe receives it, you should take my raised offering. All right, we're in the second verse already, we're doing fine. Now, what's this kol ish? So, Alufe Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda David Frein, had a very interesting conception. According to the rabbis, all the materials that were given to build the tabernacle, the gold, the silver, the wood, the cloth, all this stuff, fell into two categories. One category was material which had been prepared in anticipation. According to some Midrashim, Yaakov knew they would eventually go out and build a Mishkan in the desert. And Yaakov already supplied them, planted trees. He planted trees so that they would have the wood and so forth. We'll get to that later, the acacia wood. So there is a category of materials which were already prepared. Then, people who didn't have already prepared materials, they gave whatever was suitable that they happened to have with them. It says, each one, I show you what was with him. Now, is there a difference between those two categories? The materials that have been pre-prepared by Yaakov and company, and the materials which they were giving on the spot? Which would require closer inspection?
The present.
The present. Why? Because we assume that whatever Yaakov put away, he did right, in full line with all the specifications of the building department of God. Building department specifications are always very complicated. There's stress factors in steel. We're in the house of an architect. You can't just dream up something and it feels right. You have to check every tiny component for its durability and strength and flexibility and so forth. So we assume Yaakov checked out all the building department specs upstairs before he put aside materials to build the Mishkan. But the Jews in the desert, the newly liberated slaves, while they may have meant very well, Asher Yivenu Libo, everyone whose heart moved them, they had the wonderful feelings. But they may not have checked so carefully all the specifications, they may not have known how to check them. So Moshe has to check their materials to make sure they meet the standard for the divine building code. Okay? That's how he interprets it. So from B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel, the ancestral Jewish people, you just take it. But they'll give it. It'll be a taking to them, but they'll give it. Then from everyone whose heart motivates them, you take my truma. It's repeated, and the word truma is repeated. You take and check that it's fit to be a raised offering to God. Very nice word. Now this rabbi, Tzvi Yehuda Frein, was involved with Hasidic sects. Can anybody guess which? He was a Jerusalem rabbi who died not so long ago. He was involved with Tolos Aron, the most extreme anti-Zionist synagogue in Mei Sharim, and was Satmar. I think he was a Dayan in Satmar. But his writing shows quite a breadth of personality amidst great traditional knowledge and viewpoint. So he says like this. He says with all of us, it's just like Reb Soloveitchik, there's two parts to our religion. What we raise up to God, how we change and manipulate the world to bring out the divine in it, and it's such a kedusha. How we do that comes from two sources. How do you approach God and transform the world to God? Where do you get all this stuff from? God make an appearance to you, Martha? No, never. Anyone here have a vision from God, just out of curiosity?
Yeah.
Yeah, you, I'm sure. What did God say to you? Evan, shape up.
No, I just get insights from looking at the weather.
All right, insights, but a direct communication. So how do you know what to do to bring the world to God, to bring yourself to God? How do you know it? How do you know what to do? Maybe standing on your head will help. Maybe doing an Easter meditation. How do you know what works? How to get close to God? Is it being nice to your neighbor? Is it being ultra makbid only to eat padatz so you can support their holy wars? Well, what is it that brings you close to God and transforms the world? How do you know? What are your sources? Your ancestors. So the first source, and psychologists have said that true religion, where it's not just an ego trip, should be rooted in some tradition. Our first sources, we have a tradition from our fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We start off our prayers mentioning Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, right? That's how you're talking to God, how you know the whole process works, that it has any meaning or purpose. Well, they did. And we have a Torah handed down, Moshe to Yeshua, Yeshua is a Canaan, and it traces it down to Yanshe Knesset Sagadola, and Pirkei Avot goes through all the rabbis, then the Rambam takes up from there in his introduction to the Mishnah and brings it down to his time, and later books show us how it came from the Rambam down to 1988. So we have a tradition, right? Tradition. What's the other source of our knowledge of what's right and wrong and how to relate to God and how to deal with the world? What's our other source besides tradition?
Torah.
That's tradition. Torah's part of tradition. What's our other source besides tradition to know what we should do, what's right and wrong? Is there another source?
Oh, the sages today.
That's also part of tradition. All right, today's sages, they're interpreting the tradition. Is there something else?
Education.
Let's think of the bracha on the Torah. Asher nasan lanu Torah semes, who has given us a Torah of truth. The Chaye Olam, an eternal life, nata b'sochenu, has planted in us. He has planted in us. And you could say it means the Torah plants eternal life in us, but what's another way to interpret it? Instinct. Our insides. We are a living Sefer Torah in a sense. So everybody, I don't care who it is, works with two components. He works with the tradition, which is not from him, it's what he got from all the generations before. And he works with his own quest and search for God. As Reb Soloveitchik says, the Torah says, if you seek God, no matter how far you are away, you will find him. But if you don't seek him, even though you grew up in Mei Sharim, you daven 3 times a day, but if you don't ask your own questions and aren't sensitive to your own feelings, you won't really find God. You'll just be a robot repeating the tradition. So therefore, a man must have the tradition, otherwise it's just a searching, groping in the dark. And if he ever gets anywhere, he'll probably be too old to do anything about it, and will have ruined his life already. That's what Sadiq Golan says. If man can understand the whole Torah from his own mind and feelings, which he felt you could. So why have a Torah? He says, because until you get there, you have all kinds of bad habits which would cloud your thinking, your life would have been wasted. So it's not said. We'll do what God said, but nishma. And then we'll try to integrate our own understanding with it. So therefore, a man, and this is what this Satmar Dayan said too. He said a man must make his own search for God. And he will come up with all kinds of ideas and feelings and contributions. However, those, he says, we treat with more suspicion. What he got from his fathers, those materials prepared for the Mishkan from the children of Israel, just let them give them. But that which each man volunteers from his own heart, his own innovations, you take them, Moshe, and examine them carefully to see if all the newfangled stuff is fit for inclusion in our tradition. These new additions. That's a Satmar version of Reb Soloveitchik's words, which is actually a pretty good thing. Okay, so now we've done pretty much 2 Pesukim. we still have the question as to why the Torah says, "V'yikhuli," they shall take for me, rather than they shall give for me a raised offering. Any suggestions?
Yes, I have
Yeah.
an idea. It's like going out of yourself. It goes somewhere. It goes to.
Take, but it's take. It's not telling you to go, it says take.
Take it to the Mishkan.
Well, you give it for God. Do you take it for God? Where do you take it from?
From yourself.
From yourself. All right, so.
The whole idea is to be like a riga.
So you're saying, that's a nice thought, that it's a taking away from where it is. That the stress is you should disengage yourself from it, and your possessions all should be in the service of God. You should take them away from their usual self-serving function, and you will now take them and put them in another place for God. That's very nice. And similarly would be the word Truma. What does Truma mean? What does Truma mean? Huh?
It is a present.
Abortion?
A truma is a donation. In modern.
Today, in modern Hebrew, the word means donation. It comes from here.
It's
Donation
not
to the
actually
temple.
strictly a sacrifice, is it?
No. So how would you translate Truma? What's the shorish? What's the root of the word? Lift up. Rama Kogoyim Hashem, Allah Shemayim Kavodo. God is great, mighty, high, lifted up above all nations. And in their eyes, he's up in heaven. But in our eyes, Amashpil Erof Hashemayim Ba'aretz, that God comes down into earth. And you can find God in everyday life. All right, so Ram is high or elevated. Laharim is to raise something. So therefore, Truma is raising something. And that's the idea that I've not expressed. That you take it out of its normal, rather sensual, temporary, low context. Gold and silver and brass are jewelry and wealth, things which aren't very high or elevated or spiritual, and you lift them up by using them in God's sanctuary to build a great synagogue with lots of glass and gold and real pretty things. So you lift up those material elements and sort of incorporate them in the world of spirit, in the world of permanence, in the world of eternity. That's Truma. And you shall take them and make them a Truma. Very nice. There's one other drush on that at least. Sometimes a person thinks he's getting something and he's really losing something. And sometimes a person feels he's giving something and he's really getting something. Okay? We learned at the end of the beginning of Exodus, Vayechazu Sham, that the Jews got possessions there. The Jews got prosperous and multiplied in Egypt. Vayechazu Ba, and they were what? How would you translate Vayechazu Ba? They grabbed. Yes, they took things there. They grabbed them. Lechos b'mashu, to hold on to it. They held on to their stuff there. But actually, if you analyze the word carefully, Vayechazu, what binyan? What you just graduated the first part of Wolfon. What tense? Not what tense. What type of verb is it? Which category? Passive. Right. Nifal. Yikatev. It shall be written. Yikatev v'yichosem, or tikotev v'tichosem, you should be written and sealed for a good year. Passive. So vayechazu ba is they were grabbed in it. When a man thinks he's acquiring possessions in Galut, he is being acquired by those possessions. Because of the ranch house, because of the nice car, because of the cheap video, because of everything working good and cheap and efficient, he suddenly is a slave to a culture which is not his destiny, which is not his own, which pulls him out of his true world. So therefore, he thinks he's acquiring, but he's being acquired. Sometimes it's the other way around. You decide, okay, I'll give $100 for sponsoring a Parsha sheet or whatever. So you think you're giving, but maybe you're getting, assuming God likes it. I don't know whose side he's on. So you don't know when you give. Certainly when you give for the Mishkan, you give a Truma. At that point, you feel you're giving up your money, but you're really getting, because that's what you take with you. You can't take it with you, but this you can take with you. We say, Aser ti aser, you shall surely tithe. The rabbis say, read it, Aser ti asher. Tithe that you should become wealthy. Maybe not materially, maybe in different ways. But there's sometimes when you give that you're really getting, and sometimes when you think you're getting that you're really giving up something or being possessed. Okay? So that's they shall take from me a truma. It's not they shall give because they're really taking things for themselves. They don't know it. Okay. So we did two Pesukim already. Yeah.
Another idea that everything we have is from God. So we have to take it from God in order to give it.
That's certainly also. You can't really give God because everything is His. We ourselves, if it's made by our labors, where our abilities and strength come from, and the raw materials we use, it's all from God. It's from Him from you that we're giving to you. That idea is very frequently expressed. Okay, so we did the first two Pesukim very nicely. Now, Bezosa Truma, again the word Truma. This is the raised offering, Asher Tikhu Meitam, which you should take from them. Why do you need that other phrase? We just said what you should take from them. And gave all the drushes. So why now? And this is the Truma which you should take from them. Gold and silver and bronze and so forth. So the Sephorno says, this and nothing else. Someone has a beautiful sheet of plexiglass. Someone has a really nice piece of silk or polyester. We're now about the 50th anniversary of the discovery of nylon. Great event in modern life. Plastics, for good or for bad, who knows? You only know afterwards. The swamp was a mistake apparently when they drained it, ecologically. You never know what's good or bad. Only God knows. That theme comes in here. At the end of creation, God blesses His entire universe. He sees it's good and blesses it. Moshe sees at the end of the Mishkan that they did as God said, and He blessed them. Moshe doesn't know what's good or bad, but if they did what God said, it's good. Man can't know. Man can only know how it feels at the moment. All right. So the Sephorno says, this is the raised offering you should take from them, that the Mishkan had very, very strict specifications, as I mentioned before. And you could just bring any material. It might be very beautiful material. It might be very nice. Some rare animal, skin, but no. There are very specific materials to give the desired effect here. So we start off with gold and silver and brass. Now, there are statements in the Midrash Rabbah especially, which I'll have on the sheet, which compare everything in the Mishkan to the creation story. And the Torah is light, it starts out with light, and so forth. There's many, many comparisons. That what the Mishkan really is a reconstruction in miniature, a symbolic reconstruction of the basic nature of the universe, and the basic nature of man, and the basic nature of the Torah. And where is all this happening, by the way? Where does God speak to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Israel? Where is all this happening? On Sinai. Remember what we had at the end of last week's Sedra? They get a whole bunch of laws. We're taking it now as the Ramban, and everything is in chronological order. And Moshe goes up. This is what he's told. What did he do up there 40 days and 40 nights? He learned about the Mishkan. And we'll see shortly, God says, as I will show you, or as I have shown you up on the mountain.
As I showed you.
We'll see. We'll see.
That's why it's confusing. That's what I'm
It gets very confusing, and there's many versions. Some say this whole thing only happened after the golden calf, but I, for simplicity's sake, I am just doing according to the Ramban, who says everything is in chronological order. We'll see if it works out. Okay. Then you will take Techelet, Bargaman, B'Tolad Shani. You'll take blue wool and dyed blue and dyed purple and dyed red. B'Sheish, fine linen. B'Izim. What's Izim?
Good. It's good.
Well, what is it? Goat's hair or goats?
It's good. We had it last year. We had this
Right.
last year.
Izim is goats. Now, do you embody live goats into the walls of the Mishkan or something? Whole goats, like the Egyptians did with the Jewish babies in their buildings?
We know that he's talking about cloth.
Yes, but is it goat's hair or goats? The next words are, and the skins of rams dyed red, and the skins of tachashim, whatever they are. So we say the skins of the animal. Here we don't say the hair or the skin of the goats. We say goats. Later we have all the wise women spun the goats. Not the goat's hair, the goats. And the rabbis deduce from that the true wisdom of a woman is in spinning. Whatever that means. Does anyone here spun? Nobody ever spun? You don't know what you're
We haven't got it in trouble.
You've knitted? That's not what it's mentioning. Spinning. To take the raw fabric and make it into something useful. Thread. Anyway, so goats apparently is literal. And as Rashi brings from our tradition, that they spun the goat's hair into thread on the goats. On the goats. That's why I asked if anyone did spinning, especially of goat's hair. Apparently, while it's alive on the goat's body, it could be when the goat is killed, I don't know, but I assume not. It could be that somehow retains a certain moisture or flexibility or something that makes much better thread. So according to our tradition, just reading the words literally in the Bible, it certainly makes sense. Otherwise, the reading is very peculiar. We have the Se'er of the goats by Yaakov and so forth. So here they took goats and they spun the hair on the goats. I guess after it was spun to thread, then they clipped it off. Then they sheared the goat. Now, by the way, I forgot one thing. The thing I mentioned before from the Orach Hayim, that you need permission to hand over God's word. Laymore is something you can put into public use, into the files. Answers another question back in Genesis. What question? There's a very difficult question in Genesis, which Gedalia Fleer gave this answer, but we couldn't find the source till I found it now. The problem was, how did Abraham know that Sarah was going to have a baby a year later? Anybody? Angels, right? Wrong. I knew you'd all say that. All right. No, that's how Sarah knew.
Yeah,
That's the beginning of Va'eleh. But at the end of Lech Lecha, the previous portion, with God's revelation to Abraham and changing the name from Abraham to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah, he tells him you're going to have a kid a year from now with Sarah and you're naming your son. The whole story. And Abraham apparently does not tell Sarah. And she doesn't know about it until the angels come. So the question I asked, why not tell him? So there were all sorts of answers, and Gedalia Fleer said he thought that you're just not supposed to tell it unless God tells you to tell. So here's the proof of it. The Orach Chaim brought that Gemara, that Laymor. It's not Vayomer Hashem al Avram Laymor. It's Vayomer Hashem al Avram. So he understood that this was not to be communicated at this point to Sarah. Okay. Now, we have the materials pretty much here. See where we up to. Acacia wood, shemen la'ma'or, olive oil for the light, besamim l'shemen hamishcha, spices for the anointing oil, v'liktoret hasamim, and for the incense, avnei shoham, usually translated onyx stones, v'avnei miluim, and the various stones, with 12 stones in front, which were put on the ephod and the choshen, the two garments of the Kohen, which we'll get to next week. There's a problem with that too. There's no Kohanim at this point. Where are these garments all about? Unless God is giving Moshe information in advance. Or maybe the temporary Kohanim, the firstborn, had similar garments. I don't know.
Why? The Torah says that we're going to be a nation of priests.
Yes, that's all of us. But when it speaks of an ephod of the choshen, it's speaking about one Kohen probably. You're suggesting we all would have such garments at this point. Interesting.
At the end of days, sure.
Maybe. I don't know if we put ephod and choshen in the singular then. V'yasu li, and they should make for me mikdash, a sanctuary, and then God will dwell where?
Among them.
Among them, not in the sanctuary. V'shachanti b'tocham, and I will dwell in the midst of them. I heard from a fellow named Ruben Schwartz, who heard from a Russian Hasidic rabbi, I think, Rashevsky, something like that. An interesting thing. V'shachanti b'tocham, I will dwell in the midst of them. This is temporarily now going to be in the Mishkan, but after that there will be two temples. How long will the temples last? Anyone know how long the temples lasted? A little more. 410 years the first temple, and they say 420 years the second temple. All right?
Well, wasn't it about, didn't they build it just after they got back from Babel?
Yeah, 70 years in between.
And then finished up until 70 ACE.
Yeah, 70.
About 600.
1 second, they come back. 586 is the destruction of the first temple. 560, but it takes quite a while to build it. Ezra comes back, but it's not built right away. Okay? So it comes out, I believe they say 420 years. So assuming
It was
it's
in
correct.
years of 420.
Yeah, yeah. that's correct. It's very nice. V'shachanti, I shall dwell. If, it can be read very simply, v'shachan, and he shall dwell, tet, taf, yud. How much is taf yud? 410. Okay? So the simple reading is he shall dwell 410 years. God will be there 410 years. V'sheni, and the second temple, well, let's take V'sheni out of it. If you take V'sheni out, let's see how this works. Yeah, you have left Taf Chaf. And the second, Taf Chaf. How much is Taf Chaf? 420. Okay? Now, what's in the middle in between them? Chaf Nun, 70. All right, so that's V'shachanti. I shall dwell b'tocham, in their midst. So we don't build the Mishkan to have a dwelling place for God, because God, the heaven and heavens of heavens, as Solomon said on dedication, can't contain him. He doesn't need our place. The earth is but his footstool. But we concentrate him there in that one place so that we can pick him up, that we can consciousness raise ourselves so that he dwells within us. Then once God dwells within us, what do? We walk right out with him. We stick him in our pocket like a pickpocket. God is integrated within us, and the pickpocket walks away and takes his loot back home. So everyone acquires God, so to speak, integrates God into his personality when he comes to the Mishkan or Mikdash, and then he takes God inside of himself back home to revolutionize, to change, to spiritualize life back home on the farm in Galilee or wherever he comes from. Okay, that's clearly the idea here. In Shabbat Shiurim, Rev Miller says that this idea of focusing is only necessary when you fall. When man is at his true heights, he can see God in the Carvel store, in the bathroom, in anything, in the most material, the most gross things. He can see God in everything. But when man has lost his awareness and consciousness of God, and at best just speaks of Mother Nature or some other euphemism of an impersonal God, so at that point, he needs all kinds of focuses, mitzvahs, very perceivable, sense-perceivable objects, which will give him a feeling of God, excuse me, by their excellent design for that purpose. So the Mishkan serves as a focal point for a Jewish people which has fallen away from being able to see God everywhere. And some even say it's a concession to the sin of the golden calf, to their low state at this point. Similarly, various Sfarim recommend that a person find one mitzvah which turns him on. There's all kinds of mitzvahs. Some you feel good about, some you don't feel so good about. What's your favorite mitzvah, Admon?
I'm having a lot of difficulty with all.
With all of them. Is there any one that comes easy?
Birkat HaMazon, I like.
You like Birkat HaMazon. Fine. What's yours? Is there one mitzvah do you find like pleasant to do? No problem.
He enjoys eating.
Yeah, all right. You need the two together. Any particular mitzvah you can think of that comes easy with you? No? You?
Kiddush Shabbat.
Kiddush for Shabbat, yeah. Danny? Any special mitzvah that you find like really you can do with joy and enthusiasm?
I haven't thought about it.
All right. What would you say?
I was going to say Shabbat.
Shabbat. All right. You dig Shabbat. Hang in there. Shabbat's coming. Ruth?
And Bikkur Cholim.
Bikkur Cholim. All right. Visiting the sick. Bill, what would you say? Volunteering. Martha?
I was saying also volunteering and also helping people.
Good.
Need help.
I find personally learning, but not detailed technical learning, grand learning like this, going, we're technical, but sort of overview learning turns me on, and building a sukkah. And the whole sukkah thing turns me on. The lulav and esrog and all, not so much. It's nice, but the sukkah turns me on somehow. I like to build, I eat from all old houses, fixed up our place in the old city. Each person has something which, they don't have to fight so hard. So in his exposition, Rabbi Miller says that just like the Mishkan was able to focus everyone, to get them all enthused, so the same way everybody has to find his equivalent of the Mishkan, a particular mitzvah which turns him on. And then he should do that one with really learn about and do it with zeal And from the zeal and involvement with mitzvah, which he will get naturally through that mitzvah, he will gradually spread it to other mitzvahs and so forth. That's his concept anyway. And he thereby tries to explain when the Talmud says, anyone who keeps this mitzvah is as though he kept the whole Torah. What do you mean he didn't keep the whole Torah? He kept the one mitzvah. But somehow through that one mitzvah you can get such basic insights and principles that it will lend itself to make it much easier for you to keep the entire Torah. Which reminds me, one thing I did forget, the word take. That's a strong word. Like if someone wanted to speak in a very genteel fashion, they might not say, I took it, I purchased this, I received it. Take, you almost get the feeling of somebody reaching in the grab. In fact, when someone really does a job on someone else and sells him something which he really shouldn't buy, he says, I got taken, at least in English parlance. He took me. So the word take, lekach, has a strong connotation. And Rabbeinu Bachye says that indeed the word take denotes doing something with zeal and enthusiasm. Okay? Ki lekach tov nasati lechem, Torah siatazovu. I've given you something to really take. Don't give up my Torah, and so forth. Many.
I've got another idea.
Yes.
When we talk of Jerusalem,
Yeah.
even now, we say going up to Jerusalem.
That's the
Maybe-
raising motion.
Yeah, the Beit Mishkan. You go up to the Beit Mishkan, and we're talking about the raised off. So take it up.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking it up.
Well, his concept is it should be done with enthusiasm. It should be taken.
Right.
Now, that leads to an interesting discussion in itself, enthusiasm. Like, there are people who are always enthusiastic. Where are the most enthusiastic people to be found? The most. Same as Simon's probably. All right, now, then there are people who are never enthusiastic, who are always just take everything very quietly and calmly with no enthusiasm. Where are the most unemotional people to be found? And say the Simon's probably also. Catatonics and so forth. Now, so somehow enthusiasm is a very complicated thing. What is healthy enthusiasm? What is not? There's the learner and there's the enthusiast. There's the quiet or sameach boy and there's the enthusiastic eshaterer boy. Each place has a different milieu, a different color to its emotional nature. Now, Rabbeinu Bachye's theory is one should be enthused. And he quotes a pasuk from Mishli, take my Torah rather than gold, and so forth, my teaching rather than silver, implying that there should be that same zeal that exists for gold and silver. It's not hard to work up enthusiasm over those things. I mean, you see the guys in Machne Yehuda, they're all hustling to make a buck, kablanim, salesmen. Everybody doesn't just work quietly to make a buck. They really get enthused about it and push it. Right? So that enthusiasm is very good. So the idea of the Mishkan, as he explains it in his introduction to this parsha, is that enthusiasm for the material world, when the Jews, you should be enthusiastic about God in the world. Who's going to be enthusiastic about making some money and putting up a building? There's a God in the world that you can relate to. That should turn you on. Buying fruit, it's the bracha maybe which should turn you on. Or that God gave you the fruit. All right, but this is where you're at. If you're just going to work on all that God and learning stuff, you're going to be a dull boy, sort of. It's not going to work. You know you're not there yet. So he says what you do is you take your natural enthusiasms for gold and silver, for material, tangible things and buildings, and you use them in such a way that they will pull you out of that itself. You take gold and silver and brass and nice wood and cloth and dyes, and you build a mishkan, you build a tabernacle. Once you've built that tabernacle, you come around to use it. I mean, it's not nice you should donate to shul and never show up for services. So once you show up for services, you begin to get the message. It's an association with all this enthusiastic building of physical, tangible nature. Then you begin to transfer some of the enthusiasm to the spiritual process itself. And the ultimate goal is that God, you don't care about God dwelling in that house, but that God should dwell in them, b'toch leiv kol echad v'echad, in the heart of each and every one. So the Mishkan is viewed as a transitional process to wean one away from the material world without destroying his personality or enthusiasm, and to gradually transfer that enthusiasm from the material world to the spiritual world. Yes, Dan?
I heard that the word enthusiasm and theos, in God.
Uh-huh. Very nice. Enthusiasm and theism. All right, very nice.
In theos, in God.
Now, this thing of enthusiasm coming from the physical and tangible, I once thought about in my attempting to develop a system of therapy for therapists. There's a problem, in my opinion, with philosophers, psychologists of a high order, maybe some writers even, people who deal with words and abstract thought. What is the problem? The problem is they're never really sure they accomplished anything. You talk, you think it does something. A man who fixes a car has a very tangible accomplishment. The car didn't work, now it works. A woman who cleans the house looked rotten, now the house looks beautiful. You paint a room, it's no longer yellowing or dirty or old, it's bright and cheerful. It's a very tangible thing, it's good for the soul. Patient comes to a psychologist is well trained in things, and I'm the last to knock it, they really, they know a lot. But still, it's so complicated and deep, you're dealing with an image of God, a human being, not just with something in the physical world. You're never sure if you're right, or if there are factors you don't know, or it's just so complicated. First going into philosophy and trying to establish principles of truth. If he has any honesty, he's never sure he's right. So, but man needs a feeling of security and accomplishment. At least he should be able to fake himself out that he has it. So therefore, I would say that people who are in very abstract things like that should have some tangible things that they do. Cooking or painting or fixing cars or taking pictures, whatever, so that they can get a feeling of groundedness and security and accomplishment. Now, in the course of normal life, there is something to ground the very Luftmensch, high-flying person. What grounds him? This guy just sits and learns Torah, and his mind is somewhere in the Kabbalah, and he's not in this earth. What grounds this person?
Just day-to-day living.
Ah, can he avoid day-to-day living? Maybe he can, yeah. Take some
Children,
bread.
Children.
Right. The thing that forces you not to get too spaced out, if you have any sort of conscience, is children. So therefore, in a sense, if you have a system which both stresses abstract preoccupation and the highest metaphysical speculation, but also stresses that everybody has to have children. So even though the ideal in such a society is you marry a good, strong woman who can run the whole show and you can sit and learn, you marry an ancient child, not one of these weak, helpless, modern PhD ladies. Still, you can't help it. Your children come to you. There's sometimes she's sick. Even the best of the ancient childs get sick once in a while. And you have to deal with the things. Reb Soloveitchik tells a story of, I think, a grand uncle of his who was really a person who was learning day and night and paid no attention to his children or family. His own father, who was a Talmid Chacham, had to help the wife to deal with the children. This man just wanted nothing to do with the real world. He produced the children, and that was about it. So finally, a daughter got married. A daughter gets married. He has to come to the wedding. He wasn't a bad person. So he's getting dressed, and as he puts on his frock coat, a button pops up. Oi! Sar Gidol Bani, the difficulties of raising children. So you can't help it. Something's going to happen. They have to eat. You have to support them. And there is a verse in Song of Songs 5:11, if I remember, about Shchorot Korev, something like that. Black is ravens, and the black ravens have a reputation for being thieves and nasty and merciless in the Talmud as opposed to the white ravens. And the Talmud comments, I think it's Eruvin 22a, I looked at it a little while ago, that refers to the great scholars who learn day and night to produce. And they have to make themselves black as ravens, emaciated, hardly eating. And they have to make themselves cruel as ravens, vis-a-vis their families. Now, this gets into a most interesting ethical question, which I suddenly, when I didn't have to, I spent 2 days on it now, I added to what Ruth typed already, the Parsha sheet, so I don't know how much you'll get in. I added a whole thing on how should the true Torah person relate to his children. And it's not a simple issue. I'm showing you a big need for the children. They're like the material link which keeps your enthusiasm and life involvement and groundedness going, so you don't wind up in some abstract place. But on the other hand, as I expressed it, they are in opposition to your main task. The man is to learn Torah and really know about God and all.
But men are to have to teach their sons.
Teach, yes. Teach, yes. 2 years old? 1 year old?
No.
So what does he do with them when they're 1 and 2 years old? My wife's comment would be if he doesn't do anything with them at 1 and 2, they won't want to learn from him at 5. Well, the good old days, you just took out the strap and they learned. And then once they began learning, they appreciated it and they stayed learning. On the contrary, that's how you got Daddy's love and attention in the Misnagdik Yeshivish world. If you were a scholar, a little Rambam,
No, I tell you, when they're very young, he has to tell them off. That's all.
That's all. I used to don't have anything to do with it. Maybe. I mean, we're an open-minded society here. We don't go by social conventions.
And I heard that in those days, when a child started to learn Torah, you bake a honey cake with a Hebrew letter.
Who's you? Not me.
People used to
The
bake.
women.
The woman used to bake a honey cake with a Hebrew letter, showing that the Torah is sweet.
Yeah, the women did all kinds of nice things for their children. But I'm talking about the men now. There's no question a woman should be nice to her children, be close to them, and play with them, and do everything. But how about the men? Now, first of all, how many hours a day should a man spend on Torah? What would you say?
Well, there's also that there's 24 hours of it.
Well, that's obviously wrong. I mean, you have to go to the bathroom.
You
and eat and
apologize
sleep.
every time you stop.
You apologize when you stop. I mean, you try to spend every minute you can. Is that the Jewish ideal? Yes, I would say so. You should be occupied in it. Women don't have this obligation, morning and night. They have their burden, man, that's it. So, day and night, of course, day and night can be the minimum statutory requirement, an hour in the daytime, an hour in the nighttime, or a certain fixed period. But the basic ideal seems to be like you should make your own living. But as much as possible, you should learn. So that doesn't mean a man should study an hour a day or 2 hours a day. 5 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 15 hours a day if you can, before he's married. No, what does he need money for? I mean, just earn a little to eat, and that's it, or eat at home, his family. So the ideal is man should learn all the time. And how much time should he spend with his little children? Like, for example, you have a sweet little child, 1 year old, 2 years old. You can play with him 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day. Should you do it? Is that morally wrong? Obviously, it's a very nice thing to do. It's a fine mitzvah, gemilas chesed, if you're not a male who has to learn. If a person can't learn, he doesn't have the intellectual ability, or, I don't know, some reason or other he can't learn, there's nothing around to learn with, nobody around to learn with, all right. So then he should do things like this. It's not that there's anything wrong with a man playing with little children. On the contrary, it's an act of kindness, of human beauty, of divinity. You see the soul of a little child, and it's pure and all. But assuming he can learn, so should he do it? Or is he doing something wrong if he does it? I'll just give you a few sources, and then we'll go back to our subject matter. But I thought this was so interesting that I spent a couple days going through the sources. A prime source would be in Pirkei Avot, chapter 3, depending on your edition, Mishnah 10, 13, or 14. There's no consistent numbering of the sections within the chapters of Pirkei Avot. Reb Dosa ben Hyrcanus says, 3 things take a man out of his world, of the world which God wants him to be in. Terrible things. I mean, was it like murder, adultery? I don't know. That comes later. There's things like that mentioned by Rebbe Kiva. But what are the 3 terrible things which wreck a person's whole mission in life? Anyone remember? Anyone remember? What are the 3 things which wreck a man's world?
Is that sleeping late?
Shena shel shachri, sleep in the morning, to sleep late. What else? This is for males, not for women. Yayin shel saharayim, having a nice leisurely lunch with a couple glasses of wine. Is it nice to sleep late? Well, you might argue it is. It's pleasant. Is it nice to have a leisurely lunch with wine? Nothing so terrible. And what's next? That's the 4th one. That's maybe a consequence of the other three. It's going to wait. Huh?
Playing with children.
Sichat Yiladim, the speech of children. Yes, Sichat, the casual speech of children, takes a man out of the world. So the reasonable conclusion is, one should not. It's just that it says, Al Tarba Sichai Misha, don't waste time chatting with women, even your own wife. So you shouldn't waste time. Not that there's anything wrong with it, you understand? But if the man is supposed to be learning all day, and learning is really hard, it takes a whole lifetime just to get a glimpse into the Torah. So it's like a man who would be a soldier, on whose work the whole world depends. He can't waste time playing with his kids and all. Very little.